We set? Ready? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم أكرمنا بنور الفهم وافتح علينا بمعرفة العلم وسهل أخلاقنا بالحلم وجعلنا ممن يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه اللهم آمين. Welcome. Inshallah, we're in their courtyard here, so alhamdulillah, this is Redland, so first time we're actually doing it here. We usually do it in Rancho. But alhamdulillah, welcome inshallah. We always remind ourselves of the Quran and that there is always improvement. SubhanAllah, last weekend I was in Texas. And you know, regardless of how much you think you know, there was only one that perfected the recitation of the Quran, which was Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Everybody else is a student in the field. And we always repeat and remind ourselves that even the Sahaba radwanullahi alayhim, they were not of the same level when they were reciting. So some of them used to have some even kind of debates among themselves. How is it? And did you hear it like this from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and so on. So I was in Texas last weekend and I met Sheikh Ramadan al-Sabbagh. Sheikh Ramadan al-Sabbagh is an excellent reciter, recitation of Hafs an Asim. And he actually runs the Mass Youth Center in New York. They have about 300 students and it's just a machine. They have 2 doors that they have made, so students wait in line, they go for about an hour, and the moment these finished, another one. It's a machine. It's about 300 students every day. They go through that cycle. It's an amazing kind of, it's a machine there. Sheikh Ramadan Sabbagh is excellent. So he was visiting because he was kind of the mass leaders nationwide that had the meeting. So I had the opportunity. So I told him, you have to listen to me. You have to listen to me. So subhanallah, he got me on. It's a very subtle thing, very small thing. Harf al-Qaf. And you know, and again, this is just to emphasize that that as much as you know, eventually when you find somebody who just has it, maybe one thing that he does best compared to others, maybe on that thing he's just excellent. So Harf al-Qaf, he said, Khalid, you have it from the right makhraj. And if I am so critical at you, there is just one little thing. When you say Qaf, you're doing Qa, and you're making your mouth a little bit more oval than what is needed. Instead of saying Qa, you should say Qa, 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 because you're trying to force the makhraj to come from your shape of the mouth rather than coming from the back of the tongue. So that is, and it sounds the same, Qa as opposed to Qa, astaghfirullah, Qa, Qa. Qa is the right one, not Qa. Qa is the wrong one. It's Qa, Qa, Qa. And the emphasis becomes on the back of the tongue.
So by making it oval?
You're forcing it to sound like a true Qa. Even though, I mean, for the general people, for many of the Qurra, it's actually appropriate. Point being that inshallah we're learning this and we're trying to, you know, get whatever we can from this. But anytime you get access to somebody that just has it, listen to them and put your qira'ah to them. And maybe there is one thing that they will correct you. So, and it's a continuous process. It's always a continuous process. So that is something inshallah to keep in mind, because it's a continuous learning thing that we do with the Quran. We actually did al-mad last time, and we said that the mad is basically of 2 types. This should be review. Okay, this should be review. So help me out here. Mad is of 2 types. It has been 2 weeks, I realize. But what are the 2 types of mad that we have? Jamil. Al-asli wal-far'i. The natural mad and the derived mad. Al-asli wal-far'i. And al-asli, we said, is based on what? Very good. It's summarized in the word nuhiha. So if you have a dhamma followed by a waw, that will, instead of saying nu, you would say nu. Or if you have a ha with, or if you have a kasra followed by a ya, instead of saying a hi, you would say hi. Similarly with the fatha followed by an alif, instead of saying a ha, you'd say ha. So that creates a mad. So dhamma followed by a waw, kasra followed by a ya, or a ha, or a fatha followed by an alif creates this mad. This mad is a natural mad. And natural defined by the length by which you actually say it, by the counts of fingers, the scholar said. And that natural mad is 2 haraka. Nuhiha, nuhiha, nuhiha. And that kind of measure gives you a kind of the implication of how much counts you will do. Nuhiha. So if you say nu, it's extended, it's inappropriate, it does not work. It has to be 2 haraka on this. That's al-madd al-asli. And then we said al-madd al-far'i is caused by what? There are certain things that when added to this, so you have huruf al-madd, the 3 waw, ya and alif. But when encountering other things that will cause extended mad, we call it al-madd al-far'i. So what are these? نعم معلش لا تفضل. Okay, so encountering السكون المد العارض للسكون مد اللين. طيب, let's go over the one by one, and I'm going to just put the name. So we said مد طبيعي and then فرعي, and then now so let's go through the first one, which is المد العارض للسكون. So what's المد العارض للسكون? So apparently when there is a mad and it encounters a sukun, naturally that letter actually is not a sukun, it's arad, meaning it became a sukun. It's naturally not a sukun, but when it becomes a sukun, then it's going to make that mad modified, not the original 2 haraka. So, and in what situations will this happen? When would a letter naturally is not a sukoon, but it turns out to be a sukoon under a given situation, which is when you stop. In the Arabic language, anytime you stop at a given letter, it turns into a sukoon. That's just the natural occurrence. And so when you stop on a letter that has a sukoon after one of the letters of these mad, so you have the mad. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It's actually Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahimi. It's actually with a kasra. It's actually mutaharrik. So it has a kasra, but then now when you stop at it in the Arabic language, anytime you stop, the mutaharrik, the one which has a vowel, becomes a sukoon, sakin. So this is arad. It happens because of stopping. It's not naturally like that. When that happens, the mad that is happening here is no longer just asli. So it becomes mad arad lissukun. This mad arad lissukun is how many haraka? 2, 4, or 6. Jazakumullah khair. Very good. 2, 4, or 6. So you could keep it if you want as 2. So you could say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's just 2 haraka. Or 4. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's a 4. Or make it a 6. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's a 6. So you can do it 2, 4, or a 6. And we said the general rule for the scholars in majority of the Qur'an is how do they make al-madd al-arad lis-sukun? 4. With the exception of when you end the surah, or when you end your rak'ah, when you end your recitation. At that point they will make it a 6. So they will make always al-madd al-arad lis-sukun 4, but then when you stop they will make it a 6. So that it indicates that I have ended. This is time to make our ruku', kind of thing. That is not just for the beauty of the sound. That actually has a rule, a foundation for it, which is this here. Okay, that's al-madd al-arad lis-sukun. Any question on that? Today we're going to do a number of practices, so I want to make sure the rules are clear before we proceed. The second type is what? So we said madd al-asli we talked about. and then المد العارض للسكون, and then مد الايه, what's the other, you mentioned اللين, مد اللين. What's مد اللين?
I can go by my notes. Mad preceded
Yes.
by a ya or a wow.
Very good. Okay, give me an example so that we can apply it. Yes.
When you end with a ya or a wow and you elongate it a little bit. So even though it's like a letter before, so it's like a letter and then before that letter is ya or a wow.
Okay, very good. So if I have naturally the word, hopefully you can see this. This is the word deen, right? This is the word deen. Why would this be a mad tabi'i here? Because it's a ya preceded by a kasra. So that's deen. But what if the same thing, but it's written Allahu Akbar? It's not gonna work. طيب. The word dain. The word dain. Dain here, the ya is not gonna be mad tabi'i. Because for mad tabi'i to occur, the ya has to be preceded with a kasra. It has to. But dain, it was actually preceded by a fatha. So if you have two letters, ya and waw, ya and waw, both of these are huruf al-lin, ya and waw. If you have two of these letters that are preceded by a fatha, that causes this mad. Okay, and how many haraka is this going to be? 2, 4, or 6. So for a number of examples, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says alif lam mim, and then says ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ. So why am I doing رَيْب? If it was ra with a kasra followed by a ya, it would have been reeb. Reeb would have been just 2 haraka. I can't extend it more. But now it's a ya with the letter before having a fatha, so you would make that either a 2, a 4, or a 6. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ. Okay, or ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ, and so on. Okay, so that's a 2, 4, or a 6. Now similarly, you have what? Jazakallah khair. Bawa. Ahsan. Similarly with the waw, the word khawf is a similar idea. If it is a waw preceded by a dhamma, it would have been khu, but it's khawf. So that's why we have this maddalin, which is 2, 4, or 6. Okay. The third type of mad far'i we mentioned is what?
Is it the hamza?
Not the hamzas yet.
Iwad? Is it not the iwad?
مد العوض. مد العوض. And what is مد العوض?
Is it when the word ended with the tanween?
Very good. Which tanween? Because we have 3 types of tanween. Which one? Yeah, tanween al-fatha. Tanween al-fatha. If the word has a tanween but it's a double kasra, you don't change anything. If it's a tanween with a double dhamma, you don't change anything. But if it is a tanween with a double fatha, this type of tanween, when you end at it, you actually have to say that you don't just say an. So for example, ma an, you don't say an, or you don't say ma, you don't do that. Even though naturally we said earlier that if you end with in the Arabic language, when you stop at a given letter, you always stop with a sukoon. So if it is a double kasra, you would say ma, it's supposed to be in, but then we say ma, we stop with a sukoon. Similarly with the dhamma, the khawfun, for example, we would say khawf. But with a double fatha, it's a special situation. So we would say ma'a. We made a mad out of it, not just stopping with a sukoon, but we make a mad out of it. That is a substitute. We substituted the tanween, عوضناها يعني. عوضنا التنوين with a mad. So we kind of substituted that tanween with a mad. So anytime in the Quran For example, afwaja. Why do we say ja and not jan? Or afwaj? No, it's afwaja. Why ja? Because of this tanween that happens to be at the end. When you stop at it, you create a mad out of it. That's called mad al-iwad. Okay, this mad al-iwad is how many haraka? 2. Okay. You don't do it 4, you don't do it 6, under any condition, whether you end the qira'ah or not. So we can never say afwaja. That's wrong. You just cannot do that. It's by definition only 2 haraka. Okay, because originally there was not a mad anyways. So what's being created here is just the minimal mad that you add, which is the minimal mad is always a 2 haraka. طيب. So we talked about mad al-tabi'i, we talked about mad al-arad al-sukun, mad al-lin, mad al-iwad. What else? There was another one we talked about. 2 of them actually. Which one? Mad al-sila. Mad al-sila is what? That ha, ta al-marbuta, that ha that we put always. That ha, when it comes to the word bihi, for example, so we have numerous examples here, mad al-sila. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he says, وَلَمْ يَكُلْ لَهُ, it's supposed to be lahu. There's not supposed to be any mad with that. There is no reason, because we said mad is always that you have to have a dhamma followed by a waw. There is no waw here in the word lahu itself. But when you recite, you cannot say وَلَمْ يَكُلْ لَهُ كُفُوًا. You cannot say lahu kufuwan. You have to put a mad to it. So you will say lahu kufuwan, lahu, 2 haraka. You have to add that. And that's why in the new masahif that we have, they add this small little waw here just for ease, to make it easy on us to realize that there is actually a mad that's being added there. Similarly here, هذه جهنم. Why is there here a ya that's being created? It naturally is not part of it. But in the recitation you'll have to say it. So these ha that we mentioned are supposed to be adding those, adds that extra mad in there. So we call this mad al-sila. Without cheating, how many haraka? How many? 2. Yeah, it has to be 2 actually. It has to be 2 unless there is another condition that forces it to be 4 or 6. Okay, and today we'll talk about that. Today's mad that we have not talked about yet, we will see why that additional mad. So mad al-sila is an interesting one. That's why there is something called mad al-sila al-sughra and mad al-sila al-kubra. Mad al-sila al-sughra is the lesser one, which is just simply this one with just a 2 haraka in it. But beyond that, if there is another situation that even would make it extend itself more, so we will have an extended mad above and beyond what was just created. Okay, we're okay with that? طيب. And then we have mad al, we talked about this, but we have another mad, the last one. No, we're going to talk about that one. Not yet. We're going to talk about that. I'm sorry. No, there was another one among these. It's called mad al-badal. Mad al-badal. Now, if you remember, for the mad to occur, we talked about this. It was the last one we talked about, so maybe you were too tired at that time. So I'll give you your excuse, inshallah. But mad al-badal is naturally for the mad to occur that, and we'll talk about that in more today. But if there is a hamza that comes after the letter of mad, so for example, when we have when we have a hamza, which we'll talk about, mad al-munfasil al-muttasil, which we'll talk about today, there's actually an extended mad that occurs because a hamza shows up later. But what if the hamza comes before the harf al-mad? What if the hamza comes before the letter of mad itself? So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says بِآيَاتِنَا, notice here the a, here the alif, before it came al hamza. When that happens, a mad is actually created. So you can't just say بِآيَاتِنَا. It's بِآيَاتِنَا. You have to put that in there. That is called مد البدل. Similarly here, notice the hamza before the alif. رآه. رآه. And these are always two counts. مد البدل. And today we'll have also numerous examples of these that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran. So when the hamza comes before the alif, before that letter of mad, it creates this mad called mad al-badal. Okay, it's actually not the usual one. It's the other. It's the exchange mad. It's exchanging for the natural one, because naturally the hamza comes after. This is now in exchange. It comes actually before. So it's called mad al-badal. And then the last part of mad that we talked about were the mads that you mentioned, which are the beginning letters of these short letters. Hamim, Alif Lam Mim, Ain Sin Qaf, Taha, Yasin. And we kind of summarized and said there are these disjointed letters. There is a mnemonic, if you remember. You know that on those you don't do extended. Those are the short version of the mad. And there are two haraka. So what was the mnemonic for the Hafsa, you remember? Sister Sarah? Ajara? No. Yes, the disjointed letters. There are 5 letters. Sarah? You looked? Okay, no, don't say. You looked to Sister Jilan? Hayy Tahr. Ha, Ya, Ta, Ha, and Ra. Hayy Tahr. So when you see those in the Quran, and you come to now start the Quran, so we don't say Taha. Well, that's just too much. That's lahn. That's lahn. That is inappropriate. Mad, when we extend mad unnecessary, that's actually from lahn. And lahn is among those that are prohibited actually to be reciting with. So you have to be very careful on this. So these 5 letters, Hayy Tahr, is the mnemonic to remember. So we'll say Taha. The two, just 2 haraka on each one of them. Taha. So it has to be these short versions. You can't extend them. So when we say Ha, Mim, why is it on the Mim extended and not on the Ha? It's because of this reason. Because Hayy Tahr, these 5 letters, you don't extend them. You just do two on them. So when we say Kaf, Ha, so on the Kaf, I'm gonna, because it's not one of the 5, on the Kaf, right? So we'll say Kaf, Ha, Ya, 2. And then Ain, because Tahr is not, Ain is not part of it. So remember this, because it really helps when you remember these mnemonics, so that we don't make mistakes and errors on this.
So all the other letters are 6?
Yes, and the good thing about them is there's actually a mnemonic for them also to remember. So inshallah, we'll go over those. So that's kind of what we did last time. And then we stopped actually here. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about those. This is where we stopped last time, because none of the mad that we talked about, except for mad al-badal, where the hamza came before harf al-mad, before the letter of the extension, we did not talk about mad that's caused by hamza. So here we go. This is mad followed by a hamza. What if I have letter of mad? Okay, and so again, let's just remember, letter of mad is dhamma followed by a waw, kasra followed by a ya, fatha followed by an alif. So remember that whenever you encounter that. But what if even with that, that is just a natural mad in itself, but when a hamza follows that, then an extended mad actually occurs. So when that happens, that type of mad that you will actually do in this type, where we call it mad muttasil, it's actually a connected one. Okay, this type of connected mad that will occur is an obligatory mad. You automatically switch from a 2 haraka. You cannot do a 2 haraka on it anymore. You can't. So in this kind of thing, where the word that has this you see, seen with a dhamma followed by a waw, that's dhamma, that's just the natural mad. a sin which has a dhamma followed by a waw. That's a natural mad. But see, it's followed by a hamza. And this hamza happens to be in the same word. That is key. It's in the same word. So here, su, I cannot just say su, that's just 2. You can't. And you cannot do it 3. It has to be either a 4 or a 5 count. It has to. It's an obligatory mad to do a 4 or a 5 on this. So when we read this, when we recite this, so we're going to say وَلَهُمْ سُوءُ, okay, dar. Or 5 if we were to recite وَلَهُمْ سُوءُ الدَّارِ. So this has to be either a 4 or a 5. Which one do you need to pick? Pick any one of them. However, you need to be consistent. You cannot pick in some of the words a 4 and in others a 5. You can't. For a given recitation, for a given reciter, that reciter picks one of these. Now, on one day you can do 4, on another day 5. You can. But again, keep in mind, inshallah, once you start to kind of perfect your qira'ah, people will start to kind of ask you to lead prayer. And when you do that, you don't want to be inconsistent too, because people get confused. So even though from a qira'ah perspective, there is nothing wrong on one day to switch to another, there isn't from a qira'ah perspective. But the scholars say it's best for your own sake as well as for the sake of followers that you become consistent in whichever that you select, a 4 or a 5. Now, again, this is just scholars' recommendations. What they recommend is the following. We'll talk about another mad later. They recommend on this one to keep it 5. On this one. Where the letter of mad, the dhamma is followed by a letter of mad, and then within the same word is a hamza. In that case, keep it 5, they recommend. Could you keep it 4? Absolutely, nothing wrong with that. But that's what they recommend, as you will see, because the other one is slightly different. Now notice here, they indicate that there is only one exception. Under a given condition, you can actually make it a 6. You can make it a 6. So what is that condition? And they say the following, that if it is only if you were to stop your recitation. So if you were to stop your recitation at that point, you can make it a 6. And again, this is not new. This is not new. Because remember, what did we say earlier? That we said that al-mad al-arad lis-sukun. Anytime you stop at a given letter, if it is the end of the recitation, because that letter becomes a sukun, you can actually extend it to up to a 6. Yeah.
So does it have, it's only at the end of the verse? Or like if it's waji, if I stop there, you can't stop there, right?
No, you can, for example, in the recitation, وَلَهُمْ سُوءُ. I mean, you can stop there. It will turn into a sukun. You can. Yeah. But in the middle of the recitation, you always want to keep it 4 or 5. What they're saying is, when it's at the end, when you're stopping at the very, if it happens to be the end of your recitation, again, to indicate that I'm done with my recitation, I'm going to do a ruku' or so, to indicate that, to almost communicate that with those that are behind you, you can put it up to 6. Okay? So, but that is nothing new. I mean, if you were to look at it, that's almost taking mad al-arad lil-sukun and building it into this. So there is nothing new really there. The rule of it being 4 or 5 actually is still there. It's just that now you're applying mad al-arad lil-sukun because you're ending with it. Okay? Is that okay? I don't want it to be confusing. Any question? Sister Ajara.
If it comes in the same word, yeah?
Yes.
But how do you, I think I've asked this before. If you don't know Arabic, how do you know what
Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. Yes, I mean that part of it is repetition, and we get used to it. I learned Arabic actually. Later on in my life, and I went through the same thing. But after a while, through repetition, you kind of get used to it. Now, can somebody recite this? Let's say, Shamshad, can you try this one?
Waji.
Why waji? It's an alif.
I don't know, I just know it's waji.
Sister Sarah.
It's wasl. It's called something wasl, right? The alif, I forget, it's called wasl.
Okay.
And that's what I learned. So it's
Yeah.
Wajji.
Yeah, it's waji, even though it's written as waja or wajai kind of thing. But it's the fact that to make it again easy on us, whenever you see that alif with a circle on top of it, it's really telling you that alif is to be silent. It's not to be read.
It's called wasl.
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 Wasl, yeah. Yeah, so we would recite this waji'a or waji. So if you were to stop at it again, so keep in mind the rule here is when the hamza is with the follows the letter of mad, but they are in the same word. That's al-mad al-muttasil. Okay, any question on that? And then we have al-mad al-munfasil. Munfasil means separated. So it's the same idea of having the letter of mad followed by a hamza, same exact thing, same thing. The only difference is that the hamza is on a totally separate word. Okay, so that's why it's called munfasil, while the other one was muttasil, the other one was connected. What's connected here? The hamza and the letter of mad are all connected in the same word, while munfasil is saying that the hamza and the letter of mad are in two separate words. So that's why it's called munfasil. Okay, so when we recite this, then we would say inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. Now how many, what's the mad on these? Remember what we said earlier for the muttasil? For the muttasil we said it's 4 or 5. So now when you do that, you actually could make it just a 2 haraka. You could just treat this as if, because it's totally on a separate word, and so you want to ignore that, then you can, because it's a totally separate word. You can. But also its presence could, if you were to choose and consider them as if they're one, you can. But at that point, it's as if you're going to make them muttasil. And if you're going to treat them as if they're muttasil, then the haraka on it is 4 or 5. So it's really, I mean, they separate them like this, but the rule is actually self-explanatory. This is if you were to treat them as 2 separate words, but if you want to kind of treat them and say, you know what, it's still a hamza following harf mad, so I'm going to treat it as if one, then the mad on it becomes 4 or a 5, similar to al-mad al-munfasil, al-muttasil. Is this okay? Any question? Hafsa, you have question? You're okay? Guys, we're okay here?
The question is, there's a lot of, just general question, there's a lot of mads that the elongation is 4.
Yes.
So basically, except for the ones that are strictly 2 or 6, if you just
You can,
4,
absolutely, yes.
then you can't even differentiate for a lot of time.
Yes, yeah. You see, the scholars again, to show that the beauty of the qira'ah, for ease, what they say is find the common one and just go with it. Because it's easier to handle that way. You're not going to confuse yourself. But for the beauty of the qira'ah, and especially that you will notice these words that are al-mad al-muttasil, very interesting by the way. These are words that have some kind of either action or that show that separation or distance or so. That's the nature. Subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made. So when we say sama, it's just showing you that there is something far away. Or ma, something that comes from far away, distances. Waji, something that comes from a long distance. Subhanallah, and this is the beauty of the Quran. You see, we read it as just rules. But it has meanings with it. This is the beauty of the Quran. You tell me a human being can put all of this together, it's non-conceivable, of course. But this is the beauty of the Quran. So what the scholars say is, if you want to kind of feel the beauty of the Quran in its meanings and so on, then what they said is the following: that if you might want to treat al-munfasil as 5. I'm sorry, yeah, al-muttasil, sorry, this one here. Again, al-muttasil, treat it as 5. Because that is unique. 5 is just, we haven't encountered this before. 5 is just unique. So they said to indicate that this is a unique type of mad that comes for the Quran, treat this as 5. And then treat this one here as 4. Okay, because 5 is taken with the others, and 2 it could be for just the mad al-tabi'i. But to show that this is kind of a special mad again, the scholar said treat it as 4. But again, you know, these are options. You need to pick what is best for you. There are times, you know, until you get your breath, actually your lungs start to adjust, you might want to start with the 2 mad, the 2 haraka, because we run out of breath easily. But after a while, you know, you get your lungs start to adjust and so on, so you might want to expand. So this is something that you will have to kind of choose which way you want to go. Okay? But as we will do today, I need you to pick for yourself one and then be consistent with it, at least when we do some of the practice for today. Any questions? This type of mad, by the way, al-mad al-munfasil, the one that is where the hamza is separated from the letter of mad in 2 words, that is, it's called al-mad al-jaiz. Jaiz, why? Because you can make it simply as mad tabi'i. It's jaiz, it's permitted. So you can it's permissible that you treat this as just a 2 haraka, or meaning as if it's mad tabi'i, or treat it as really something that is an extended mad. So it's jaiz. You can extend it, you can make it short, it's up to you. You just have to be consistent with it. So in case you encounter this, al-mad al-jaiz is the same as al-mad al-munfasil, while al-mad al-muttasil is always 4 or a 5 haraka. Any questions? طيب. Now we move into this what's called al-mad al-lazim. Al-mad al-lazim, compulsory or compulsory mad. Now al-mad al-lazim, this necessary compulsory type of mad, actually occurs under 2 categories, if you will. And you will see the next slide that I will do, this green kind of shape is actually moved to this side. So it's either word based or letter based. This al-mad al-lazim. This mad al-lazim is always 6. You don't have an option of doing a 2 or a 4 or a 5, or it's always 6. So we need to be aware of these, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to recite this as a 6 period. There is no exception to it. So we're going to start with this one here, where the necessary prolongation that we'll use, and it's a word based. This word based mad that we'll talk